for the upcoming full moon, I have just one little reminder for you, and it's that you don't get good at dancing by not dancing. So this episode will hopefully make more clear why that's the reminder that I want to give you for this full moon. If I could sum it up into one little reminder, maybe one little mantra for you to keep with you, that's it, is that basically you got to try. You got to get out there and dance to get good at dancing. You don't get better at something that you maybe suck at, something that you know might be fun or good for you, or lead to a lot of good things that you want, like connection, moving your body, whatever the case may be. You don't get good at it by not doing the thing. And so maybe you keep that mantra with you. Maybe you stick around for the rest of the episode where I'm going to tell you why that is good for this upcoming full moon in sidereal Aquarius. And of course, we always end with yoga practices and journal prompts to best harness the energy so that you can get the most out of it in your life. Instead of just thinking about it, you can do something about it. So stick around to the end for your yoga practices and journal prompts, because that's what a Yogiscope is. You are listening to the Yogiscopes podcast. I'm your host, Rosemary Holbrook. And you know what? I just paused the recording because I was like, oh, I'll just cut that part out. I'll do it again. Mercury's retrograde, and I tend to stumble over my words a lot. In general, I have Mercury retrograde in my birth chart, but when Mercury is retrograde, I tend to stumble over my words even worse. And I started to just pause that, like, oh, I'll just cut it out. Like I butchered the name of my own podcast. But I'm not going to do that. So here we are. Here we go. I'm your host, Rosemary Holbrook. Stick around. You'll get to know me. I hope to get to know you through various different ways. I love getting to know listeners of this podcast. I don't have a serious bone in my body, and I apologize if that doesn't resonate with you. There are other astrologers that are much more serious than I am. If it does, then stick around. So I'm a Vedic sidereal astrologer, which means if you're newer to astrology, the Vedic system of astrology, I use it because I'm a yoga teacher, also a yoga therapist. And so it makes a lot more sense to me personally if I'm going to pair yoga with astrology, which I know a lot of other yoga teachers do as well. We love our full moon events. We love our new moon events. I love theming my classes around the current astrology, which is basically what I'm teaching you to do here when we get to the yoga practices at the end. And so when I was in my very first ever yoga teacher training, that's when I first heard of the fact that there was a Vedic astrology, that there was even more than one kind of astrology. I guess before that, I was into kind of like newspaper horoscopes. I had a horoscope app on my phone. I think it was the first app I downloaded on my first ever smartphone was a horoscope app. And I've pretty much had one ever since. I'm super into it. Love astrology. Always have. So maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you're not new to Vedic astrology. Maybe you're not new to the podcast. But if you are, it's just important to know that the Vedic system uses a different set of tools. First of all, a major one of which we will talk about today, which is nakshatras. Nakshatras means like lunar mansions. I always, on the new and full moon episodes especially, we dive deep into the nakshatra or the lunar mansion where the full moon or new moon, whatever the case may be, is happening, because basically they're called lunar mansions, right? So they affect the moon more. We can dive into nakshatras for other things too, and often do for things like Saturn retrograde, for example, which I'm going to bring up in this episode because it is relevant to this full moon. This full moon's happening in the same sign where Saturn is retrograding right now, and that sign happens to be ruled by Aquarius. So we'll talk about it. But what's important for you to know, if you're new, and maybe a good reminder if you're not new, is that Vedic astrology is a different set of tools, and most traditionally, Vedic astrology uses the sidereal zodiac, which is more astronomically accurate. It's still not perfect, but it is way more astronomically accurate than the tropical zodiac, which is what Western astrology, or if you're newer to astrology, and especially if you live in a Western country, most people just call astrology. Uses the tropical zodiac, which is less astronomically accurate. It's almost a whole sign off. So I often, especially on YouTube, because that's where people can really like comment. You can comment on Spotify now, apparently. Anyway, comments on YouTube are way more popular. That's where I get people like correcting me, like, oh no, it's not in that sign, you're wrong. And so it's not wrong or right. It's just a different system. And so if you're new and you want to calculate your Vedic birth chart, your sidereal placements. Now, so what's important about that is it will use your sidereal placements, but the Vedic birth chart also looks very different than a Western chart. A Western chart is a circle chart, which in its own ways makes sense because when we're talking about astrology, it's where the planets are in sort of this circular view around Earth. So that makes a lot of sense that the circle chart is that way. But in Vedic astrology, we have a couple different kinds, the North Indian and the South Indian. I recommend if you're starting out to use the North Indian. And so I have a chart calculator. If you go to yogiscopes.com/chart, or you just go to yogiscopes.com and you'll see a button at the top for chart calculator. On that page, and pretty much any page, it will pop up and ask you if you want the birth chart decoder. And you should get that because it'll help you understand what you're looking at. Because when you first just pull it up, you're going to be like, what does this mean? But that's why I made that resource for you to help start figuring it out. So with that said, always a good reminder, always a good place to start. Let's dive into what this full moon is all about. So as I mentioned, it's in sidereal Aquarius, and that's why I always go on that little tangent, that little spiel, because I guess folks maybe don't always know off gate. And it does get confusing if you're just out there on the internet and a lot of people aren't delineating between different kinds of astrology or different zodiacs they're using. And so it does get confusing if you're not like an astrologer and don't have an astrology software. You might be like, how do we know which one is right? So, and then there's also Vedic astrologers that use the tropical zodiac. That's another topic for another day. Sorry, y'all. I always go on tangents. I feel like I get worse during Mercury retrograde. Love it or hate it. Most folks that stick around end up loving it. So anyway, as I mentioned, Saturn is retrograde in Aquarius, and that is a big deal. That's what we're going to spend some time talking about first, is Saturn's influence here and things that may be happening globally related to this Saturn retrograde, and then therefore what that might mean, how that might be playing out. So the global example is sort of a good way to put it into context so that you can be like, oh, I'm seeing these cycles happen on a collective level. Maybe I can zoom in on my own personal life and look at what cycles are sort of mirroring that in your own personal life. And then we'll dive more deeply, as always, into the archetypes that factor into how we make meaning of this full moon, which are things like, what is a full moon to start with? What is the sign of Aquarius where this full moon is happening? What does that represent? How do we make our meaning around Aquarius? And then the Nakshatra, the lunar mansion where it's happening, which is Dhanishta, one of my favorite nakshatras. And we'll dive into it. So first of all, Saturn rules Aquarius. If you're unfamiliar with Saturn, or again, a good reminder, even if you are familiar with Saturn, Saturn represents things like delays, hard work, structures especially related to routines, habits, systems you put in place in your life. And I just want to give a little, I think this idea sort of comes from James Clear and his book Atomic Habits. But this isn't a direct quote or anything, but the idea that a habit is not something you do, it's like something that's a part of who you are that plays out in an action format. So for something to truly be a habit, it's not something that takes like brain power from you. It's not something that you have to try for. It just happens automatically. It's your habit, which means it's usually a deeply ingrained pattern. So changing habits is really hard. And there's all this different stuff out there about how long does it take to change a habit, and the, I guess, common wisdom for a while has been folks say it takes 21 days, right? Or maybe it takes even longer than that. Maybe it takes 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, something like that. How long does it really take to change something from something that you're doing on a regular basis that requires executive functioning from you, it requires brain power from you to carry out, to something that is an ingrained habit that you just do? That's when it becomes a habit, is when it's like you just do it automatically, right? That's the difference between a habit or just an action you're trying to do that requires a lot of executive functioning from you. If you're neurodiverse might be a little bit challenging to have all that brain power, all that executive functioning, right? To carry out all these different things. So the amount of time that it takes to actually truly make something a habit is going to depend on a few things. One of those things being how often are you doing the action? Is it every day? Is it multiple times a day? Is it, something that you only have to do weekly or monthly? Obviously, if it's something that you don't do every single day, it's going to take longer. That whole 3 weeks thing or 21 days, whatever, is out the window if it's something that you're only doing once a month to start with, right? Because we know none of this stuff is once and done, right? For something to go from an action you're doing to a truly ingrained habit. And with that, your old habits are going to be challenging, just as challenging to release as starting the new habits are to ingrain. And so that's just a little tangent around sort of like what Saturn represents. So hopefully that made sense. It's not necessarily easy to change a habit. And Saturn represents things like your habits, your structures. For example, structures related to a habit. One that's like really top of mind for me, I have toddlers, I'm a mom. Laundry. I have different laundry baskets and so this was before I had a family, I had one laundry basket. That was it, like one. And so I have a clean laundry basket for stuff that's come out of the dryer that needs to be folded. Only clean things go in that basket, no dirty things. I have a laundry basket for my kids' clothes. I have a laundry basket for my clothes. I have a laundry basket for my husband's clothes. And I have a laundry basket for house laundry, things like towels, sheets, whatever, cleaning rags go in the house laundry basket. Floor mats, also, whatever, like any house laundry that's not like a clothing item goes in the house laundry basket. And so that is a system related to a habit, which the habit is doing laundry. And becoming a mom, I had to go from doing laundry once a week to this new laundry basket system where I wash about one load a day, and I wash it just whenever a basket gets full. I wash it and I start it in the morning, usually change it over around lunch. So this is a very Saturn thing. Is like I've developed this whole system around the habit of doing laundry. So that's a really simple, maybe silly example of what Saturn sort of represents and how Saturn might play out in our lives, right? And so on a global scale, right now, because that's where I said I was going to go, I went on a more personal scale instead. On a global scale right now, Saturn is retrograde in the sign of Aquarius. And so it feels like I was going to explain the sign of Aquarius separately, but it feels like a good time to explain it now. It's ruled by Saturn. It's the second sign, so Capricorn is also ruled by Saturn, and then Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is where Saturn is considered Mul Tricone, which is basically like its best placement. It's like where Saturn feels most at home. And that has to do with the qualities of Aquarius. So Aquarius, we often think of as having those qualities of Saturn because it's ruled by Saturn. So all the things that I've explained already. Saturn has what we would call a co-ruler, or I said Saturn. Aquarius has what we would call a co-ruler with Rahu and Saturn. And so Rahu is where Aquarius gets what we know of as like this unconventional vibe, this like Aquarius we think of as like kooky or quirky or unconventional, or just like aloof, different, right? Like all those things are the sort of like keywords for Aquarius vibes. But with that, Aquarius is the 11th sign, which draws connections to the 11th house. So this is, I don't need to go on a tangent about this right now, but it feels important. So the order of the signs is, there are shared qualities between the signs and the houses. And this is a point of confusion for folks. So they're like, does that mean Aquarius rules my 11th house? No, it doesn't, unless you're an Aries ascendant. But it does mean that there are some overlap in qualities in a similar way that Saturn rules Aquarius. So Aquarius in general has some overlap in qualities with Saturn, if that makes sense. So Aquarius, being the 11th sign, has this connection to networks, to earnings from career, to maybe like manifesting, because 11th house has to do with like long-term goals. And so we'll dive more into this when we talk about Dhanishta, the Nakshatra, where this full moon is happening. But all of that is to say that Aquarius in general has this connection to like the collective and Saturn, structures related to the collective, Rahu, this connection to Rahu with maybe unconventional ways to be a disruptor, to change the structures of our lives or of societal structures to better support like the greater good or the collective good, or realizing these long-term goals related to the collective, specifically like bigger communities. And so while Saturn is retrograding in Aquarius, what we know about retrogrades in general. Now, I've done a whole episode about this, so if you want to revisit it, please do, but I have to bring it up here because this full moon is happening there. This full moon is happening in Aquarius. Saturn ruled Aquarius with retrograding Saturn. So Saturn is really prominent. Saturn and what it's doing is really prominent to this full moon for those reasons. And so retrogrades in general, that's what I was getting at. Retrogrades in general are really, they like bring up issues from the past. So what we often hear, people will say this about Mercury retrograde, but it's really more true about Venus retrograde. Just for example, is that you might like run into your ex or something unexpectedly, or like your ex might try to contact you or something during Mercury retrograde. That's possible because retrogrades in general can like bring up issues from the past. But I would say that one is a more common occurrence or vibe of Venus retrograde. Anyway, the idea is issues from the past. And why would your ex come up unless there was still like some issues there? I don't know. I used to experience that. Now I've like been married for a long time, and I think it's like exes don't really pop up for me anymore. And they used to, it'd be like, I'd be scrolling Facebook and they'd pop up as like people you may know or something. Anyway, like you may want to follow this person, whatever. And so anyway, issues from the past with the Saturn retrograde. Please do revisit the Saturn retrograde episode from a few weeks ago. Also, there's resources on, if you go to yogiscopes.com and click articles, now there's a drop down and it separates out one called learning resources, which is where it used to all be just like the general blog. You go to like yogiscopes.com/blog and be taken there. But if you click on the drop down and click weekly Yogi Scopes, now you'll find just the weekly Yogi Scopes in one place. And so you can find that Saturn retrograde one much more easily now to revisit the resources around that. Anyway, Saturn being structures, being systems that serve the greater good, the collective, when it's Saturn in Aquarius, right, is that what that's bringing up. So Saturn retrograde might be bringing up issues from the past related to that. And I just got this like breaking news alert because I have now the New York Times app on my phone. I used to only get emails, and now I unsubscribed from the emails, but now I get notifications on the app. Anyway, there's always something. We can always clear out our notifications, and then there's new ones, and so that's why we have to keep doing it. That's a good Mercury retrograde practice. Anyway, this news alert I got right before I started recording. I was like, this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, is the World Health Organization just today, like it's Wednesday when I'm recording this, Wednesday, August 14th, announced they designated the Mpox in Africa epidemic as a global health emergency. So this is the second time, remember that issues from the past coming up again, second time in 3 years, the quote from the New York Times right at the beginning of the article said, this is the second time in 3 years that the WHO, World Health Organization, has designated Mpox epidemic as a global emergency. It previously did so in July 2022. And so what was going on in July 2022? None other than the last time Saturn retrograded through, well, not the last time, so that's a lie. But when Saturn retrograded through very nearly the section of Gandanta, which is where this full moon is happening, in June, so it went retrograde in June of 2022 through October, and Saturn was retrograding then very near to where this full moon is happening. So that's just interesting to me, right? That this issue would come up in this way. And it just feels really closely tied to what Saturn's doing. So when I say issues from the past on a global level, collectively, what we're seeing this happening with Saturn is Saturn moving to Capricorn in January of 2020 is really what we saw heat up the COVID pandemic, right? And so personal pet peeve of mine is when people say global pandemic, because that's the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. Is a pandemic is an epidemic that has gone global. Anyway, so the epidemic of Mpox right now is localized to Africa, to certain countries in Africa. And it's now they're worried that it's spreading further than that. And so there's a lot of other factors at play, clearly, because a lot of other things have changed and or stayed the same since COVID. So that's why the particulars are different. But there is a common theme of like, how have we handled this in the past? It's coming up again. Saturn is giving us a chance to put better structures into place to protect the collective, right? To serve the greater good of keeping more of the world healthy. And we'll see how it goes, because this is very fresh. This is right now. This is Saturn bringing up issues from the past, right? And we have a chance to do something different or not. And so to zoom that back into this full moon, maybe you consider, and so I'll share these dates in the weekly Yogiscope that I post in that place I just described. You go to yogiscopes.com, you click on articles, and it drops down, and you can pick the weekly Yogiscopes now. I'll post it there on Friday or by Friday, and I'll have the dates so you can look back at the different times Saturn has been retrograding through either where this full moon is happening, where this full moon is happening, through Gandanta, and see what that kind of brings up for you. Maybe you look at what you were going through at those points in your life, and so that will give you a good idea, maybe, of ways you can do things differently now. Like how, in what ways are you maybe being presented with the same lesson that you were those past times? And at a full moon, it's a good time to release. And so that feels like a good segue into what even is a full moon. Like, how do we make the meaning around a full moon? A full moon happens when the moon and the sun are 180 degrees from each other in the sky. So we calculate that astrologically. This time that I give you, actually, I haven't even said it yet. On Monday, August 19th at 2:25 p.m. Eastern time is when the moon and sun come to the same degree. So that would be 3 degrees and 3 minutes, right inside that Gandanta zone. The sun is in Leo. Of the moon's at 3 degrees and 3 minutes of Aquarius, and the sun's at 3 degrees and 3 minutes of Leo. So that makes them exactly 180 degrees apart from each other. And what that means astrologically. So let's think about the archetype. They're sort of straddling this axis. The sun's over in one sign, the moon's in the polar opposite sign. There's always some kind of connection between the signs that form an axis with each other. And so with this one specifically, Aquarius and Leo, Aquarius we know is all about the collective, about the greater good, about being maybe aloof, right? And Leo is like the flip side of that coin, really. The polar opposite, but it's really, we could think of it as like the flip side of that coin. Leo is about individuality, and we think of Leo as like the life of the party, right? And being really like maybe full of themselves, whereas Aquarius is kind of like the polar opposite. They might be aloof. They don't care about what other people think, right? And so that's the axis that this full moon is lighting up, if that makes sense. So I'll say more about it, of course, and how to work with it. That's what we're here to figure out. But what that means at a full moon is from that point on, from a full moon on, in Vedic astrology, the waning moon, that second half of the lunar cycle between the full moon and the new moon, the moon's getting smaller in size, is considered malefic, which sounds scary, but the idea is you're releasing, you're shedding, like the moon is. You're getting smaller. You're preparing for that newness that will come by letting old things go. And a full moon is also when we can see the full circle of the moon, right? Whereas before that, it's not quite full. It's less than a circle. And after that, it's less than a circle again. So when we can see the full circle of the moon, we might think about bringing things full circle in our lives. So that could be in a like coincidental way, like, oh, that really came full circle. That could also be in a, like, I brought this full circle as in it came to fruition, or when something's come full circle, it's like kind of come to a close. Maybe it didn't come to fruition, but maybe you're releasing it because you're like, that's no longer aligned. So that's full moons in general. Let's zoom more into this Aquarius Leo axis, as well as then the Nakshatra, what that means, and then that will lead beautifully into your yoga practices and journal prompts. So we've already talked about Aquarius and what's going on there and what that means. Quickly, the sun is Gandanta in Leo, or will be at the time of the full moon. And that's been a big topic this month. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast episodes. I spent a good amount of time talking about it on the monthly outlook that just came out last week, because folks in the Q&As, folks that were coming to the live recordings and the Q&As, had questions about, like, can we go over that again? So basically, Gandanta means the knot's end. And so you can think of it as like being at the end of your rope, right? And there's a knot there. And when you've reached the end of your rope, there's a knot there, and you can keep holding on to that knot and keep digging the pattern deeper, whatever the pattern is, or you can let go. And this is another analogy we talked about in the Q&A section after last week's podcast, was it's more like a knot in a chain, or like, if you ever had a necklace, like a really thin chain necklace, and it gets tangled, and then you have to untie the knot, and it's kind of like you get one little like strand out, but now it's like a little bit less of a knot, but there's still like a knot there. That's often what's going on with these karmic patterns that we see come up in the Gandanta zone. Is it's basically the universe is giving you a chance to either keep pulling on the end of your rope and tying that knot tighter, or letting go a little bit and letting the knot loosen and maybe eventually untie. But that might be a repetitive process, like more like a knot in a chain than a knot in some like big heavy rope, if that makes sense. And so the sun is Gandanta now, or will be at the time of the full moon, in Magha, which I'd very much encourage you to revisit that Mercury retrograde episode where I talked about what that means very deeply, very in depth. But basically, at this full moon with the sun Gandanta, and it being a full moon, time to kind of like release, bring things full circle. Maybe you're releasing something related to lineage healing, generational trauma, right? Releasing some pattern there that might be in the way of you kind of shining in your most unique self in a way that serves the greater good. So hopefully that's like a way to sum it up. And then hopefully these yoga practices and journal prompts I'm getting ready to share will help make it even more clear, like what you should do, if that makes sense. If that was a little bit vague, or if that was like, yeah, that sounds great, but how, right? So quickly, let's talk about the nakshatra. The only little piece of this astrological puzzle that I haven't covered yet is the nakshatra, where this full moon is happening, where the moon is. So the sun's Gandanta over there in Magha. Please revisit the Mercury Retrograde podcast episode and the companion post there on the website, where you'll find it in written format. If you don't feel like listening again, just go to that post. So anyway, the sun's doing its thing over there. The moon's over here in Aquarius in Dhanishta. And Dhanishta bridges over Capricorn and Aquarius. So that's why I was saying in 2022, that was when the Saturn briefly moved into Aquarius. And that was really when Saturn moved into Aquarius, when we really saw some semblance of return to normalcy in a lot of ways after the COVID lockdowns, which was a very Saturn in Capricorn thing. And then Saturn retrograded back to Capricorn. Then in that fall of 2022, we had more lockdowns. And it wasn't until 2023, when Saturn finally moved to Aquarius, that we saw that sort of resolve. So anyway, that was all happening along Dhanishta Nakshatra, FYI. And that sort of dance during that summer of 2022 that I brought up earlier, talking about Saturn retrograde. And so the translation of Dhanishta is the wealthiest, or the most famous, the most beneficent, right? So Dhanishta Nakshatra has these connections to wealth, to fame, to those things. And so I just want to point out quickly that people that are famous, they usually have a very unique persona. Like a lot of famous people, they didn't get that way by blending into the crowd, if that makes sense. And so that really exemplifies this Aquarius and Leo axis, I think, is this sort of tension being brought up at this full moon between individuality and collective. And so Aquarius is also that individuality, that being yourself because you don't care. Leo is a little bit more like, I'm the life of the party, but I'm still kind of blending into the crowd, if that makes sense, because they're like a popular one. Anyway, so that's Aquarius and Leo very much. Also, the fact that this nakshatra bridges over Capricorn and Aquarius is part of why I would say that those issues being brought up from the past have relation to some Capricorn matters, if that makes sense. So maybe you examine that in your own life. And then the deity of this nakshatra. So we always make our meaning of these things by all the little archetypes that go into, a sign. When we're talking about a sign, we're talking about the planetary ruler. What number sign is it? With the nakshatras, there's a sign that it's in, maybe two signs. Some of them bridge over two signs like this one. There's a translation. There's a ruling planet as well. There's a deity. And there's, importantly, an aim, which for this one, the four aims of life being Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, which is living righteously or living your right path is Dharma. Artha is the pursuit of wealth. Kama is the pursuit of pleasure. And Moksha is spiritual liberation. Right? And so this one is Artha. This one has connections to the pursuit of wealth, which is, we know that we need wealth to, we need money, we need means to sort of serve the greater good. Even nonprofits have to like make money, right? Like they need resources, they need that artha to carry out their dharma. So these things are all related. You need all of them for that goal of moksha or spiritual liberation, right? Like they're not like on pedestals or tiers. They're all needed. And so this particular one is related to artha, to that wealth, right? Which makes sense with the translation meaning the wealthiest. And so the deities are the 8 vasus, which are the deities of the material elements. So just quickly, the elements are, I'm just going to tell you the English translation. It's sky, earth, wind, fire, stars, water, sun, and moon. So basically, it's almost like the 5 elements that we know from Ayurveda, except for it's sky instead of ether, but same, right? Kind of a little bit, mostly. And then we have the addition of sun, moon, and stars is what this, the deities, the 8 vasus represent. And so if you combine all of that together, Dhanishta and the Nakshatra being symbolized by a drum, it has this connection to rhythm, to music, to wealth, the pursuit of wealth, being wealthy, being known for something, and connecting that, like the sun, moon, and stars with all of these elements of the material world. So this idea of like bringing the maybe like spiritual into manifest reality through things like the pursuit of wealth and being known for something, right? That's Dhanishta. So just to recap before we move into the yoga practices and journal prompts, the overall energies of this full moon, if I could sum it up, like I started in the beginning, you don't get good at dancing by not dancing. So that's kind of the idea with the Saturn and the ingraining a habit is like, you don't just like become a dancer by willing yourself that way. You have to practice dancing a lot, and you have to do it until it becomes not just a thing that you do, but who you are, right? And so that's the Saturn piece. But then with this Nakshatra, this is the part I didn't mention before because I wanted to save it until after I explain the Nakshatra, is the idea of marching to the beat of your own drummer. So that phrase I just love, the idea of marching to the beat of your own drummer. It's like, you ever heard the phrase too that's like, those who were seen dancing were thought crazy by the ones who couldn't hear the music. And it's like, are you going to be one that can't hear the music and thinking other people are silly for kind of doing their own thing or dancing anyway? Or are you going to be the person who's like following your own internal rhythm and marching to the beat of your own drummer and letting your own internal heartbeat and pulse be your guide? Like that's the idea of this full moon, this Nakshatra, with the connections to Aquarius, with the connections to rhythm from the drum of Dhanishta, with the connections to that sun being Gandanta, that Leo and Aquarius axis. That is like, if I could put all of that into one idea, it would be the idea of marching to the beat of your own drummer. And the other overall energy of this full moon is with that. So this is kind of buried within that marching to the beat of your own drummer. To do that, you have to let go of external expectations. You have to kind of lean into that Aquarius energy of being kind of quirky or kind of like outside of societal norms, right? And with that Aquarius and Leo axis thing is this and Saturn. So Saturn, we often say like a remedy for Saturn is seva or selfless service. And I mean true selfless service. I'm not talking about you like Mr. Beast style, like videoing yourself, giving people money. I'm talking about like making yourself a true servant of other people through your actions, doing things not because you're trying to appease Saturn or negate the effects of Saturn for yourself, but like truly transforming it into not just something you do, but who you are. That's very Saturn and Aquarius, like being a selfless servant versus going out there and doing some public service or some volunteering or whatever. It's different, right? And so that idea of the very Aquarius thing is like, can you make sort of like who you are be a person that tries to serve the community and the greater good through your own unique talents and your own unique things that only you can bring to the table. That's like very Aquarius. And then there is also a connection of this full moon is like, what are you manifesting? Like, lean into the material realm for this full moon for sure. And then the other big overall energy is that relationship to rhythm and timing. And so I want you to think about the idea of being in the right place at the right time. And so it's like maybe around this full moon, there might be something coming to fruition that feels very right place, right time. And I just want to remind you, this is another quote that I don't know where it came from. It's just been floating around in my head since ever, is the idea that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And so this is a very Saturn thing too. It's like it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. There is a connection to timing at this full moon. And I just want to remind you that everyone has bad luck. Everyone does. The people who seem to have strokes of good luck are the ones who are doing this hard work behind the scenes so that when they are presented with a right place moment, it is the right time because they have worked to make it the right time. And so that's a very Saturn thing, is like, what are you doing behind the scenes to make it so that you're ready for opportunity if it strikes? As well as, on the other hand, with rhythm and timing, it's like, are you honoring your rhythms or are you trying to swim upstream against them? And so the journal prompts will hopefully help with that. So your yoga practices, if you can go to a sound journey or a sound healing, especially that involves drums specifically, awesome, do that. If not, you can find those things online, or you could even play a drum yourself and let that be a meditative practice. Or could you also, just in your yoga practice, for anything Aquarius, Kumbhaka Pranayama, where you're practicing the pause, basically, is a good one. Or just like a regular vinyasa flow, where you're moving one breath, one movement. That's a really good way to connect with this energy. And then for Saturn, always, grounding poses, connecting to the feet, connecting to the lower body is really good, because Saturn is Vayu and Saturn has a really strong connection to this full moon. I hope I made that very clear. And so journal prompt number 1, what unique qualities or ideas do I need to embrace to march to the beat of my own drummer? And so some little caveat questions. Can you reflect on how you can let go of societal expectations and lean more into your authentic self? So where have you been conforming to other people's definitions of success, and how can you break free from that? And so just last little reminder, today, as this episode comes out, or I don't know if it's going to come out on Thursday or Friday yet, but this Friday is when that discount for the Focus and Flow sessions will go away. And so if you want to sign up for that, the Focus and Flow sessions, the whole idea is you're going to work one-on-one with me, and I'm going to help you through that, because that is actually a big question. Like, it seems like, that's the question for this full moon, is like, how are you going to march to the beat of your own drummer? How are you even going to do that? It's not that simple, and I recognize that, and you could spend the next year with me working through that in a methodical way, to where living more aligned with your true self becomes not just a thing that you do that requires a lot of executive functioning, but it becomes more who you are. And that's really hard, because you're going against your communities and what other people are saying you should do, and that's super hard, and I'm here to support you if you want that kind of support. So go to yogiscopes.com/focusflow. It'll be linked in the show notes if you want to check it out. So journal prompt number 2. What are my true aspirations, and how can I turn them into manifest reality? So this is kind of taking that last question and making it more practical. Like, how are you actually really going to manifest that, right? And then number 3, how can I honor my natural rhythms and cycles? Take the time to consider how you can align your daily life with your natural energy levels or rhythms. So good luck, Godspeed. I'm here for you. Please remember to keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars, and stay in the light. Until next time, take wonderful care of yourself.